Hello and welcome to episode 6, season 2 of the JAIAC's Dispute Management in a New World podcast series. 40 minutes of bi-weekly conversations with Dr. Christopher Malcolm, dispute management practitioner, international legal consultant, entrepreneurial visionary, and Secretary General of the Jamaica International Arbitration Center. I'm your host, Roxene Nickle, and on this episode, our conversation with Dr. Malcolm is a final of our two-part discussion on iNeutral dispute management platform, innovation, and access. Welcome back, Dr. Malcolm.
Thank you, Roxene.
All right, so tell us, what is your vision for the growth of iNeutral?
Through iNeutral, we would like to see justice outcomes democratized throughout the world. Yes, we have started in Jamaica, and we are in a small region, from a small region and a small country. But our ambition is much broader, and we think that there are people, wherever we find them, who could readily use iNeutral and find the benefit from it that we have had. And it is in that context why we have already had collaborations in several parts of the world, and we intend to continue to grow in that collaborative vein with a view to making iNeutral available. The other thing, of course, we want by way of ambition is that while there is a commercial component to it, it was developed with a public good element at the core. We would want to see iNeutral being made available with the public good in mind and accessed throughout the world on this basis as well. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, if we were to achieve that, would have been a significant accomplishment. And as we grow, we of course intend to expand upon the platform and to make it even more accessible than it now is, and even more versatile as well than it now is. And that is a continuing vision with no end in sight.
Mm-hmm. I know you said you'd want to grow to other entities. Is there anywhere in particular that you'd like it to be?
Already, two other places that we want to be in are Africa and in Asia. And we're already in those places. Mm-hmm. And of course, we, right in our backyards, we're in Latin America, and we certainly wish to be able to work in that vein. Clearly, as we go forward, the platform was developed with English as the main language. And we intend, of course, to have iNeutral over time take on new languages and be available to persons in new languages using exactly the same features that we have created.
Awesome. So the iNeutral platform is significant for JAIC's business, but it must also hold significant for national development as well as global outreach. Can you talk to us about that?
You see, getting back to my core, and I don't think I could ever lose the core, it's an understanding that the democratization of dispute management and accessible dispute management outcomes is a very important thing. In fact, in my view, perhaps the most important thing when you're looking at transactions, right? Now, where national development is concerned, and I'll, of course, transpose that to the international as well, what you want at all times is to ensure that people are not only encouraged to enter into businesses and to develop their personal economies, but they're encouraged as well to be in a space where they understand how to avoid and manage conflicts that may arise. And one of the things I, for example, find it difficult, where we have, for example, in the banking sector, especially where development banks are concerned, that there are loans, for example, made to small businesses to develop their businesses. And oftentimes, there's so little thought given to what is probably the biggest problem with small businesses, which is how to resolve the conflicts. And let me give you a good example. A small business, for a big business, collecting what could be the equivalent of, let's say, $500 may not mean an awful lot where their bottom line is concerned. But for a small business, this could mean whether or not they're able to survive or die. But the reality is that if they were to use traditional outcomes, or traditional methods rather, for resolving disputes and trying to collect those $500 that may be outstanding, they may simply not be able to afford traditional legal processes to be able to do that. So what you want to happen is that you want to have systems put in place which make it easier for them to have access to methods of resolving their disputes in a way which would not automatically cut into their bottom line and prevent them from continuing in business. So I think, as mentioned in the financial service sector and what they offer, that as a critical part of their financing of development and financing of SME, the SME sector and so on, must be a critical element of it to democratize process of dispute management that can be readily accessed by the small business sector. And in doing this, of course, I think, as I stretch my mind a little further, that one of the things that really has to be done there is that in the same way that persons are required to insure loans and insure other things, there really should be a component supported by the global lending agencies and so on that are in the business of supporting SME sector and so on, where they provide effective mechanisms for what is in substance an insurance arrangement for the small business sector. The details of that are things I've thought about, and certainly I could give my own thoughts in a different context as to how that can be achieved and how best it can be dealt with. But I think that is where we have to go, and iNeutral enables that. It enables that democratization in a cost-effective manner, and in a manner as well that can keep people away from expensive travel and so on. And there's something else, when I think about the small sector, and it is that important to me in my thinking, that I wish to speak a little on it, is that persons very often, when you're thinking about the cost of litigation and so on, forget to add in the cost of leaving your business, to attend court and to sit in court and to travel to a hearing and those sorts of things. Now, for a big business that would have multiple employees and you can readily make somebody available, it may not mean that much.
Right.
But for a small business or SME entity, where a single person may be doing every single thing in the business, you leave it for an hour and you've lost the sale and business for an hour. And so you now can, if you can find a way where persons can stay where they are, have comfort in the system that they're using, and be able to get their issues resolved, where they can then chase down those $500 here, there, and everywhere. And as we know from accounting, de minimis, when it adds up, it becomes important, right? So if we can find a way to democratize that process, to enable them to access it from wherever they are, and to enable them to go after what could appear to be de minimis to somebody else, then you have a situation where you can, without even thinking too far, realize that effective dispute management that allows for that level of cost recovery and business recoveries will invariably assist these sectors. And once you assist that, what do you then do? You assist them to grow, you assist them to develop, and by extension, the economy grows and develops as well.
Okay. So since the launch in May, what has been the feedback from stakeholders?
The feedback has been very positive, I would say. And I mean, including that we continue, in addition to having had it accepted by other institutions for use, we continue to have ongoing dialogue with some persons, including persons who have come to us, to see how we may be able to work collaboratively with them for the use and implementation of the system in their own way. And what we do, the system is also designed to do, is that it's an adaptable system. It can be adapted to include special features to deal with special sectors and special needs, as the case may be.
So we continue to have good feedback. And
we continue to have good feedback and good possibilities arising as well.
Awesome. So I don't recall if we mentioned it before, but I heard the platform was developed by Jamaicans. Tell me about it.
It was innovated by Jamaicans, in fact. And in fact, all the IT coding and so on was in fact done by Jamaicans, albeit not necessarily living in Jamaica. Because in fact, it was innovated, if I may claim so myself, I think I am credited with having innovated the system. But the coding and things related to that, in fact, was done by Jamaicans based in New York, who are doing exceptional work there in the IT and related business.
I know we've probably said it before, but for those who may have missed it, asking you to highlight the digital arbitration, the benefits of digital arbitration.
Well, there are several benefits, one of which is that using online not just for arbitration, but for mediation and anything else. As I mentioned, one of the good features of it is that, there's this growing trend talking about green arbitration and green everything else. The first point to note there is that iNeutral is a green platform. Mm-hmm. You don't need to generate paper. You can do everything online. So that's a significant benefit. The other benefit for me, which is critical, as I keep saying, particularly if you're in the business of international arbitration, where there are multiple parties coming from different jurisdictions, sometimes, oftentimes, or even if two parties, you may have them from different jurisdictions. You may have arbitrators in different jurisdictions. You may have witnesses in different jurisdictions. You may have all sorts of things in different jurisdictions. What an online does is that it localizes the venue. If you are doing an international arbitration in the typical way, and you have to, let's say the parties, one is in Brazil, one is in Germany, and you have arbitrators and other people in Canada and wherever, and you're trying to find a neutral venue, and let's say you find that venue to be New Zealand, just plucking something out the hat, then everybody travels there to make New Zealand the venue, which is then localized for the purposes of the arbitration, right? If you have this space which is online, and everybody can assemble there without having to leave their physical location, what you have in fact done is created a local venue in substance for each person operating from their own jurisdiction. Albeit in an environment where that in and outer quotes, for purposes of the conversation, local venue, is in fact a neutral venue as well, because online is now neutral. So that is, again, something which is critical for online. Of course, once you get there, there are issues which we could get into that could arise from that. But the fact is that that is a benefit, and it allows you to plan without travel. And I'll give you another example. Let's say I am in Jamaica, and I'm traveling to a venue in New Zealand, right? And I'm going through multiple time zones. I get there. I have all sorts of things relating to travel, right? And depending on where you are, if you think about it, the person who is traveling to New Zealand from Australia is in a much more advantageous position than I, who would be traveling from Jamaica. Both cost-wise, because I have to travel a little earlier probably than he or she does, to be able to acclimatize, right, and to be able to get into the speed of it. And I can tell you, having traveled, for example, I've traveled, say, from Jamaica to, say, Singapore, which is pretty much a 12-hour flip. When it is night in Jamaica, it is literally the equivalent daytime in Singapore. And what I do find when I travel to those jurisdictions, or have traveled to them, is that when I get there, and my sleep time is the time when I should be up working. And my work time is the time when I should be sleeping. I find that during the day, my natural tendency is to be sleeping in their day, and my natural tendency at night is to be up. And by nature, I don't take sleeping aids. So it, for me, is a difficult thing. And if I were to be most adapted to that environment, it would mean my going in much earlier than would be ordinary for somebody else, so that I can at least acclimatize. And those are issues which I think can be equated much better in online, provided you put the other guardrails in place to ensure that the process is not abused at one level or another.
Has it been difficult to get persons to see the benefits of the digital platform?
Not really. When you engage with persons, they see the benefit of engaging in the digital space. And in fairness, since COVID in particular, there has been increasing demand for and use of the digital space for dispute resolution. The court system, for example, has, over the last couple of years, been making significant use of digital mechanisms for court hearings and so on. What has not happened in those spaces, if I may say so, though, is that where they have enabled digital online hearings, they have not necessarily gone the full level, for example, of iNeutral and what we would have done, which is to create an end-to-end mechanism which is tied into a digital platform, as distinct from tapping into an existing framework which has been developed, which enables digital hearing. So for example, iNeutral, these court hearings, for example, if I were to put it that way, they use Zoom, WebEx, and these other facilities to enable their hearings. iNeutral also uses those. But in addition to doing that, iNeutral has created a holistic platform which allows for greater democratization and easier access for all, including through fillable templates. So that is the distinction there. So getting persons interested is not really what the issue is. And the issue has never been that, even for ADR in its broadest context. Okay. The problem has never been whether or not persons will use these mechanisms, but whether or not the persons who advise them and the existing contractual or other arrangements that they're in will allow them to easily move into that space. Because as I mentioned in the previous podcast that we had, you can only go into the use of ADR, and that would include using online platforms such as iNeutral, where the parties have agreed, and the agreement must be in the nature of a contract. So unless and until the contractual arrangements provide for it, however interested the parties are, you won't be able to get them in the process. And I go a little further. When a dispute arises, and that is why it is so critical to ensure that you get the contractual arrangements for dispute management settled before the dispute arises. When a dispute arises, one party will be keen to have it settled. The other will not be as keen, particularly if they think they might lose. Right. So one party will be trying to push the process along, while the other party may be doing all that he, she, or it can do to delay the process. And if it is that you have not already signed on to the use of a system and you don't want the system to move quickly, why would you then readily and quickly agree to the use of something that will allow the process to be moved on? So the starting point clearly has to be, as we move forward, is to get more and more persons at the outset agreeing to the use of iNeutral platforms, and also platforms and other mechanisms generally, which are supportive of alternative dispute resolution.
This is the arbitration demonstration. So I'm Karen Goff. I'm going to be the arbitrator in the demonstration. This is a fictional dispute between Kitco Chemicals Limited, who was claimant, and the employer company under a building contract, which engaged Competent Contractors Company Limited, the respondent, the contractor for the works. The contract is the standard form of building contract. It's a design and build contract, which means that the contractor designed the works to the employer's requirements. The design might, however, have been compromised by limitations imposed by the employer's requirements. So that's the outline of the dispute. Counsel for the claimant is Professor John Rooney from Miami. John, wave your arm, say hello. And counsel for the respondent is Mr. Calvin Hamilton from Barbados. Now, procedurally, the parties didn't agree a procedure. So as arbitrator, I imposed one. It is very tight. Each party has a very limited time to make its submissions. The time is to be shared equally. We ask you to assume that the hearing is already part heard. We have in the witness box, ready for cross-examination, Ms. Sherika Lindsay, who is the Chief Executive of the claimant company Kitco. Mr. Hamilton, for the respondent, is to cross-examine the witness. Please continue, Mr. Hamilton.
Competent contractor says that Kitco told them they have to save money, and as a result, there was no need to carry out the soil investigations.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, terrific. Isn't it also correct that competent contractors' tender was based on stated assumptions on the soil formation?
I did not get that impression during the negotiation.
All right. If you go to your statement at 12, paragraph 12, and paragraph 10 to some respect, you state that indeed certain assumptions were made.
Yes.
Okay. So there are certain assumptions were made. during the negotiations?
Yes, that's
Terrific.
the soil conditions.
Okay, and when the contract was signed, you were aware that those assumptions were the basis, formed part of the basis for the contract. And is it not true that there were no investigations done with respect to the soil formation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and is it not true that the CCL received instructions that in the event that it was not needed, that no such investigations should be incurred, and the price the price benefit should incur to KITCO?
Yes, if the investigation was not necessary.
In your reading, would the contract have limited, in any event, the contractor to only conducting one bore of soil?
No, they were not limited. The discussion was that they would perform the necessary investigation. If it was up to them, being the industry and the prudent and industry professional, to determine that. So they were not limited. We wanted to save money, but not by being penny wise and pound foolish.
The question is, if you look at this dynamic, would you consider this to be an accurate representation of what you now understand the characteristics of the subsoil to have been?
It gives a general description of how the subsoil will look. If you appreciate that the substrata is not divided in fixed lines as demonstrated on the image here, but it's sufficient for our purposes.
From your review and inspection of the evidence and site, were you able to come to any concluded view about whether the cracks in the tank were as a result of poor workmanship or instead by latent defect in the specified steel material, or that they resulted from unstable surrounding ground conditions?
Based on my review of the information on dates and design, the contractors took all appropriate steps, and I do not believe in the circumstances that the cracks in the tank were attributable to the contractors.
So in arbitration as in litigation, he who pleads must prove, so that the onus of proof of liability and causation of the claimed losses is with the claimant. There is no counterclaim. Three principal issues arose for consideration: the design of the works, the construction, the quality of the works undertaken by the contractor, and potentially the impact of the ground conditions at the site. Did they affect the works and cause the damage? If so, who carried the risk of adverse ground conditions affecting the integrity of the works? The evidence. I accept Mr. Lindsay's evidence as to the facts that KITCO specified the waterproofing. CCCL did not warrant it, so if it was wrongly specified, there's no redress against the respondent on that score. Was it poorly applied? As a matter of fact, there's no evidence of bad workmanship, says the expert. I accept that evidence. Ms. Lindley described the ground conditions. She confirmed KITCO provided no site data and didn't expect CCCL to undertake tests if they were not necessary, but said that CCCL did not warn KITCO of any implications of not testing. I must say that for a company engaged in the purchase and storage and safe sale of fuel and other chemicals, I consider that it is self-evident that if there is no ground investigation, there could be a risk of unforeseen ground conditions materializing and consequent damage to the works and contamination of the surrounding soil and any water source. But that in itself doesn't absolve the contractor of responsibility, because clause 410 of the contract imposes obligations on the contractor to satisfy itself about the site conditions, and it was not amended or removed from the contract. If KITCO provided no soil investigation, there is no conceivable basis upon which CCCL could have satisfied itself as to the suitability of the ground conditions to support the proposed design of the tanks or methods of their constructions. But on a contract of this nature, would they be considered necessary for tanks just below the surface of the ground? The expert says no, they would not be usual or necessary. I accept Ms. Lindsay's evidence that there was contamination and loss caused to adjoining farmers, but that was due to leakage from the tank. But was that due to leakage from the tank or other causes that are due to CCCL? Turning to the expert evidence to assist, I find that I'm not assisted. It is said that the steel used for the tanks was substandard. It was specified by Kitco. We heard that in evidence. Was that the cause? The expert does not reach a conclusion. Safe to say that the desktop evaluation shows everything to be within acceptable parameters as to the design and construction methods. He also gives unchallenged evidence that the contamination could as easily come from other sources. In all the circumstances, I cannot say that even on the balance of probabilities, the claimant has proved its case. The claim is therefore dismissed. Thank you very much, everybody. And that concludes the arbitration demonstration.
Madam Arbitrator,
Yeah.
I think we ask for costs.
I think I have the power to order costs under the rules, and in my judgment, costs should follow the event. The respondent has succeeded in its defence and therefore should be awarded the costs of the defence insofar as there is any reduction to be made. That can be made on an assessment of the costs in due course. Thank you both very much.
So how have other countries responded to iNeutral and the use of the same digital arbitration that we're talking about, especially given the differences in customs and laws between countries?
Well, the difference in customs and laws would not really matter much if you're talking about online, using an online platform, because the platform has not been designed with specific laws in place per se. What it has been designed to do is to allow a process flow that assists or supports the resolution of disputes irrespective of the underlying legal system that you're operating in. So when you come to a dispute, or let's start from the transaction. When you enter into a transaction, the contract that you enter in would ordinarily indicate, or even if not indicating explicitly, will by a process of implication indicate what legal laws and legal system it is engaging. So once you enter that space, and it will set out, for example, that this contract will be subject to English law, or the law of Jamaica, or the law of Barbados, or the law of Bahamas, or the law of wherever. And that now sets out the law, the substantive law that you will refer to when you're trying to interpret and apply the underlying contracts, right? But where dispute resolution is concerned in terms of process, insofar, for example, let us use arbitration as an easy one. We create what we call to be a seat of the arbitration. What we call that is what we call the jurisdictional seat, meaning the parties will agree, for example, that even though the contract itself may say the law of Barbados to deal with substantive issues, they could well agree that in the event of a dispute, the dispute is to be resolved in Jamaica, right? So when you come to Jamaica, the procedural element of the actual hearing will be subject to the law of Jamaica. Why? Because the moment you're in Jamaica, you are subject to the laws of Jamaica. And if it is an online arbitration as well, you will nevertheless still subject it to a jurisdictional seat. And the jurisdictional seat will also establish the laws that are applicable in the conduct of the proceeding, right? So once you get to that point, you are then tied into that. But getting back to where I started, you don't get to that point and surmount it and get ease of use in it until the parties have agreed to it. So the jurisdictional and the legal issues are not, the legal issues are the law relevant to the substance is not really the most important factor. What we have already seen, as I mentioned in the previous podcast, is that we already have persons from countries in Asia, in Africa, and elsewhere, including elsewhere in the Caribbean, who have already bought into and are in fact either already using or in the process of getting to use or to implement iNeutral as a platform for use. So it is clear that there is acceptance, and it is clear from what we have seen that there are persons who are comfortable with the system and what it has set out to do and what it is in fact capable of doing.
Okay, great. So are there plans in place to do training via the iNeutral platform? Training
is there, and training has to be twofold. One is that you need to train people effectively in use of the system, and not just iNeutral, any online or other platforms that you're using require people to be effectively trained in their use to maximize their benefits.
Right.
The other thing, of course, is that because you are using iNeutral as a platform with the process of arbitration, mediation, other things involved, there's always need for ongoing training in the use of these mechanisms, what they do, what they don't do, and how best to use them. So those are things. And what iNeutral is not itself pure and simple a platform for training per se. However, there is an arrangement through the JAIC as well that it has with the Caribbean Institute of Alternative Dispute Resolution, which in fact provides training and has been providing training for use of ADR mechanisms for resolving disputes and so on. So those arrangements continue, and I myself am a big fan of collaborations. Allow individual pieces to work as they must. Allow entities to develop their own strengths, and then collaborate those strengths to form something. Jacks of all trade, as I said in one of the earlier platforms. I'm not a firm believer, or in fact a believer in this jack of all trades thing. I believe in masters being allowed to do what masters are able to do. Right. And I believe in processes being designed so that they can leverage mastery rather than cobbletry.
We have all this information that's coming into the iNeutral platform. Let's talk about data protection. How is that managed?
Data protection is a very important matter, and it is something where whether you're in the online or physical space, you want to know that when you share your data, it does not become available to all and sundry. And so you must always put effective measures in place to do that. And online becomes sometimes a little more difficult, quite frankly, if we were to be honest. Whether you're in a physical or in a virtual space, you can always have challenges with data protection. So for example, you may be in a physical space and you have your data stored in a safe, and somebody simply steals the safe and your data is all gone. Or a fire comes, it is not properly saved or properly protected, and the place blows up in smoke and everything is burnt to ashes. There's that possibility as well. In the online space, you're not likely to have the thing going up in ashes in a fire, but you could have the possibility, of course, of people hacking into a system and getting access to your information and using it improperly. Right. So there are risks wherever you are. And I think what you have to do in every case is to make sure that you have the best protection available, having regard to the risks that you have identified. So if you're in a physical space, you ensure that you get good safes and ensure that they're well protected and bolted down and all the other features that you can have. You make sure that the fire is safe and all these sorts of things, right? If you're in an online space, what then do you do? As we have had to do for iNeutral, you ensure that you get the best experts available to design your systems for protection. And you use all the tools that you have available to you to do this. And that is what we have done. The best you can do, frankly, is use the resources that are available and ensure as well that you have a system of ongoing checks and balances. Right. And you have a system which is sufficiently capable of adaptation to meet changing needs, changing demands. And you have to ensure that there's robustness, but there's robustness which is flexible enough to change as and when the circumstances require. And that is what we've done.
And to also ensure that the persons who are utilizing the platform know that their information is secure.
And make sure that they're honest and reliable. And so you have to make sure you go through those checks and balances at all times.
Definitely. So how does iNeutral tie into your vision for Jamaica to become an international center for arbitration and ADR?
Jamaica, I think, is strategically positioned in the Western Hemisphere. Literally, it's probably the middle of it all, of the Americas and all of that. We literally are. And I think Jamaica has, over the last several years, done very well in putting in place enabling legislation and creating a space that can allow for seamless arbitration, mediation, and so on at the international level, including having signed on to the Singapore Convention on Mediation on day one, which was a significant accomplishment, and taking other measures that can move Jamaica in that space. Now, what iNeutral has done is sought to leverage the space that has been created by the enabling frameworks in Jamaica to allow for the development of a platform of this nature. Mm-hmm. And what iNeutral will then do in relation to that is to itself go out, advertise its value, advertise as well what Jamaica has to offer, and then through that mechanism, allow persons to have confidence in the system of Jamaica, not just by reference to our laws, but by reference to our people and what we're capable of doing. And I think as we develop things, including iNeutral, and we demonstrate that we are in fact thinkers, and we are also doers, and we're thinking and doing at a standard which is global, and which is in accordance with best practice at any level you could find it, then you will have more and more people warming up to what we're doing, and that warming up to what we're doing in our own individual space can then translate to the broader national, and I dare say regional beyond Jamaica to the rest of the Caribbean, and outward where persons can then say, we have something, we can be supportive of it, and we can be confident that in it we are not getting anything less than we would have been able to get going elsewhere. And that for me is a vision we have. Mm-hmm. And if we are able to expand upon that and we're able to concretize it in a way which makes people from wherever they are in the world comfortable, it only serves well the interests of Jamaica and the interests of the broader region, because we are regional in our approach and have always been. We don't see ourselves as being islands entire to ourselves. We see ourselves as part of a broader universe, and we see the democratization of justice initiative that we're interested in, and the process of making it easier for access to be something which is a public good that we all must strive for wherever we are in the world. And if we can be a part of that process, however small it is, that's a good thing, and it's a good thing to encourage and support, and Jamaica and the region will benefit from it.
Well, thank you so much. And we know your vision will continue to materialize. Thank you so much.
We work for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malcolm. But before we go, here is today's Did You Know fact. Did you know that in addition to implementation for use in the Caribbean, the iNeutral platform has already been implemented for use in parts of Asia and Africa? Well, there. Please don't forget to check out all of our podcast series Season 2 episodes, now available on Buzzsprout, Podbean, Spreaker, JAIAC YouTube channel, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Until then, I'm Roxene Nickle, and on behalf of Dr. Christopher Malcolm, Secretary General of the JAIAC, thank you for joining us. Special thanks to our sponsors, JDIC, protecting deposits for you and me, CIADR, Regis, work your way, iNeutral, dispute resolution made easy, CP Malcolm, dispute management practitioner, ADEB Consultants, consulting engineers for almost 60 years, Impact Justice, improved access to justice in the Caribbean, and Wassel & Wassel Arbitrators Services Incorporated.
I save because one day my little business is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and I make sure to put away a little something for him.
And thanks to JDIC, deposit insurance protection on my savings gone up.
You've been upgraded. Deposits held in commercial banks, building societies, and merchant banks are covered under the JDIC deposit insurance scheme up to $1.2 million per depositor per institution. JDIC.
Protecting deposits for you and me.
Book rooms by the hour or as long as you need. Regis meeting rooms are the perfect setting for your next pitch, interview, board meeting, or workshop. They're equipped with the latest technology, a friendly support team, and catering on request to ensure everything runs smoothly. Experience our meeting room solutions. Book your tour today by calling 876-618-8800 or visit regis.com.jm. That's regus.com.jm.
All our episodes are also distributed on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Deezer, Stitcher, Podcast Index, Pandora, TuneIn Plus Alexa, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, and wherever else you get your favorite podcasts.